everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We're getting right down to it. Today, we're talking about chapter 26 of Matthew's Gospel. We're almost done, and we're blessed to have yet another guest today. And I will invite my guest to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Vicki Zust. I'm the rector of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Upper Arlington, and Jason and I are colleagues. We are neighboring congregations, really. So that's how we know each other.
Excellent, excellent. So we're talking about chapter 26 today. What happens in this chapter?
Chapter 26 has a lot in it. It picks up with the plot to kill Jesus. So the religious authorities are gathering in the courtyard of the high priest to talk about what to do with this troublemaker. And then we get a cutaway to Jesus and his disciples having dinner, and a woman comes in and pours costly ointment on Jesus's feet. And Judas particularly gets very incensed about this, that all this money had been wasted on this ointment. And Jesus tells him, the poor you will always have with you. You won't always have me. She's getting me ready for my burial. And we cut away again to Judas talking to the priests about how he's going to betray Jesus. You can picture this as a movie, can't you? And then we go back to the Passover, and Jesus is very explicitly having a Passover meal with his disciples. And he tells them that one of them sitting around the table with him is going to betray him. And they all ask, is it me? Is it me? Is it me? And when it gets to Judas, he says, it's not me, is it, Rabbi? And Jesus says, you have said so. So Jesus is doing his Jesus thing of it's, somebody else's thing. We get a very short paragraph of the breaking of the bread and the saying, this is my body, this is my blood. And then he goes into predictions about the disciples abandoning him. And they all say, oh, no, I won't. No, I won't. I won't deny you, especially Peter. Peter jumps in and puts his foot in his mouth and says, I won't deny you, even if I have to die for it. And then they go out to Gethsemane and pray. And Peter and James and John can't even stay awake. And Jesus comes back to them a couple of times and says, can't you even stay awake while I pray? And then Judas shows up with the temple guards, and he kisses Jesus on the cheek, and Jesus is arrested. And Peter grabs the sword of one of the guards and cuts off the ear of a servant of the high priest. And Jesus says, put your sword away. Don't you think I could do that if I wanted to? And then he turns to the high priest and says, why are you doing this now? I've been around a lot. Why are you doing this now? And then they take him to the high priest's house to try him before the council, the Jewish council. And while that's happening, we have Peter out in the courtyard with the high priest's servants, denying that he even knows Jesus. And then that's where the chapter ends. So, I mean, you really do think Matthew could have been a screenwriter. This could be a really great episode of a TV series ending on a cliffhanger. So
Fantastic.
There's a lot that goes on in that chapter.
You were right. There is quite a lot. It's one of the longer chapters, I think, in the book. I think chapter 23 might be the longest chapter, but this one is not short by any means. What was one thing that stuck out to you?
The one thing I think as I read this whole chapter is kind of contrast and irony of, Judas saying, hey, this woman wasted all this money on this ointment, but there's a little note in there that he held the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. And then he goes off to betray Jesus and does it with a kiss. And Peter is I'll be there with you the whole time, and then is denies him. And Jesus is kind of sitting in the middle of all this, knowing that it's going to happen. And Matthew is very explicit that Jesus knows what's going to happen. Jesus knows Judas is going to betray him. Jesus knows Peter's going to deny him. Matthew makes that clear in his text. So the irony of these kind of contrasts and responses is what stuck out to me this time reading it.
Yeah, I've often contemplated whether Jesus knowing what was going to happen was supernatural or not, or just him being an observant leader, right? He knows these people, he knows them well,
right.
And spent a ton of time with them, and just knows. It's kind of like, some people have theorized that Martin Luther King's last speech, to the sanitation workers in Memphis was so, I've been to the mountaintop. I'm not going to get to go into the promised land with you, right? Yeah. People like, did he know what was going to happen? Did he know what was going to happen? And I think, I don't think maybe, but maybe not even in a supernatural way. Maybe he just knew that with all the death threats and all the tension and all the maybe even just the stress and the level of the schedule that he kept, which I don't know if you've ever looked at his schedule. It was insane.
Oh, yeah.
That he just knew it wasn't going to end well, right?
Well, and there had already been an assassination attempt on him
multiple times. Yeah. And so I mean, it was reasonable for. I don't think it doesn't take supernatural knowledge for him to go, no, this is probably what's going to happen to me. This is just not going to stand. And maybe Jesus was in the same boat. Herod had been after him, the Pharisees and the Sadducees have been after him. Rome ultimately gets him, and it may not have taken, it may just have been him being observant of the people around him and being an observant leader to know, because
and certainly he knew Peter, and he knew Peter was, inclined to make extravagant statements and not be able to live up to them.
Right. Yeah. And so, Peter says, yeah, I'm going to be with you. And then when the chips are down, he makes a business decision and doesn't take the tackle, and that's, that's on brand for Peter in so many ways. But I mean, even just a couple of chapters earlier, when you have all the woes, like chapter 23 that I was talking about, he's standing in the temple and taking the powers that be to account in a very, very public way. It doesn't take supernatural knowledge to know that there's going to be violent repercussions to that by the powers that be.
Well, and I think he also understands the circumstances that the Jewish religious leaders are in. They have this very, very narrow exemption to Roman law carved out for their people that allow their people to worship as Jews and not to be required to worship the Roman gods like every other conquered people is required to. So they have this very narrow exemption carved out for them that is predicated on them keeping the peace. And Jesus knows this. Everybody in Jerusalem knows this. So he knows, as he's stirring up unrest, that there's going to have to be a response to that. And, if you put yourself in the high priest position or in one of the priest positions, this guy is we know what happens if we lose this exemption. All of us get wiped out because either we'll have to deny God and worship the Roman gods, or we'll die. And not just us as individual priests, but all of our people.
Right.
Get rid of this guy before Rome does Rome's thing. So, and Jesus is aware of that too.
Right.
So.
It's just interesting to read this at Advent.
Yes, I was thinking that too. It's that, we're as we're recording this, we're less than a week before Christmas. And this is where it ends. This is where it ends.
So I think for all of our readers and listeners and viewers, be mindful that the creche leads to a cross, and the creche doesn't make much sense without the cross, and it's the whole story that matters, and including Jesus's affront to the powers that be. Does not shy away, does not promise us that when we take on the powers that be, that there won't be repercussions.
That's
for
right.
that.
That's right.
God's own son taught it, so we can't expect anything less.
Well, and God's kingdom is not yet on earth as it is in heaven.
Right.
So
right. So
this is
the fallen powers that Jesus was going up against are still active today, and even though the ultimate ending is assured, our endings in the midst of that are not, and so there's something to be mindful of in that, as we expel a whole lot of energy to celebrate the baby Jesus. We need to expel the same energy to understand the grown-up Jesus too.
Well, and that the birth is only the beginning. Right?
Yeah.
And you can see it in the beginning, especially in Matthew's narrative, where the people who most honor him are outsiders.
Yes.
That, from the beginning and through scripture and even till now, the person in this whole chapter who shows Jesus the most honor is the woman who we don't know anything about her except that she's a woman who can afford costly ointment, who shows up and anoints his feet.
She knows the situation.
She knows the situation. We know
nothing
about
Peter,
her.
Better than Peter. At the calling of the disciples, they were definitely outside of the leadership, right? They were, fishermen, trades, working folks, not the religious leader, not the government, Roman leaders. They're outside the power structures of those things. So they were kind of outsiders. But now at the end of the narrative, they're just as clueless.
That's right.
As the power structures. They have become the power structures. And so I think that's reading Matthew this year. First time I read Matthew in a long time, this way, and just really that hitting home as a religious leader myself. Am I incarnating the woman with the ointment in my ministry, in all aspects of my ministry, or am I incarnating Peter, who makes promises and can't keep them? Right. So it's been very, in a healthy way, very challenging to read Matthew this way this Advent.
Well, and then the real challenging question to that is, in my ministry, am I incarnating the religious leaders of creating an alliance with secular power to create a space for my folk?
Yes.
And defending that.
Yeah.
One of the commentaries I read in preparation for this suggested that the disciples in Matthew represent the strength and the weaknesses of the first and second generation church to whom Matthew is actually writing. And so that in Judas and in Peter and in James and John, we see both the strengths and the weaknesses of the early Christians living into following Jesus. And so you see the passion and the zeal, and also the falling back, and the we're here for you and we can't stay awake, and the questioning. So what are you doing? What is God about? That all of that wrapped up is Matthew's church. So what is God doing? When is Jesus coming? We don't understand. We hope, we love, we're there for it, but boy, is this hard.
And that's our congregations as well. That's the modern church as well. And it's its beauty and its grace and its sinfulness all at the same time. And all of that is accepted at the altar,
Mhm.
and all of that is God's grace pours out on all of that,
Mhm.
which I think is also in the text too. So
Mhm.
very, very lovely thing, and challenging thing.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. We're
You're
really
very
grateful.
welcome.
We're really grateful to Reverend Vicki Zust today for talking with us about chapter 26. Y'all keep reading. We only got 2 more chapters to go. You can do it. And we'll make it to the end of the book, and we'll make it to Christmas Eve as well. Remember to
There you
hit the
go.
like and subscribe button, hit the bell as well, so you're notified whenever we post a video on our YouTube channel. You can support all the ministries of St. Patrick's by going to pats-dublin.org/give and making a contribution today. That supports all of our ministries and this YouTube channel as well. And keep reading, y'all. And remember, no matter what, God loves you more than you can possibly imagine.